Boa tarde, pessoal. Estou muito animada para essa live de hoje, porque teremos uma convidada super especial. Oi, Grace, tudo bem? Temos uma convidada super especial. E como eu já falei um pouquinho nos stories aqui para vocês, ela tem muitas ideias maravilhosas, muitas dicas incríveis para compartilhar com a gente, com famílias que estão, ou querem fazer ou já estão fazendo a criação bilíngue. E eu tenho certeza que vocês vão amar tanto a Kaila quanto as ideias dela. Então eu vou ver se ela já entrou aqui pra gente poder começar a conversar. E vou pedir pra ela contar um pouquinho mais sobre a história dela pra vocês também. Eu conheci o trabalho da Kaila aqui no Instagram mesmo. E eu, na verdade, nem sei como foi direito que a gente se encontrou, mas eu comecei a ouvir o podcast dela e me apaixonei. Eu ouço ela falando assim, parece uma velha amiga, assim, me sinto super acolhida pela fala dela, pelas coisas pelas ideias dela também, assim, tenho muita afinidade com a forma como ela pensa sobre a criação bilíngue e acho que tem tudo a ver a gente trocar ideia hoje sobre isso também com vocês. Então deixa eu adicionar ela aqui.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. Such a pleasure to meet you.
Yes, equally. I am super excited about this conversation.
Thank you so much for accepting my invitation and joining us here and for sharing all your wonderful ideas with us.
Of course. Oh my goodness.
So I was just telling them how I kind of got to know you through your podcast. So I know a lot more about you than you do about me because I've heard so many of your opinions about raising bilingual children and about so many things, even personal things that you share in your podcast, and you don't know much about me. So if you want to ask me anything about myself,
yeah,
I'll be happy to.
Well, I know we've corresponded a number of times, and I was looking at some of your pictures. So your kids are 4 and 1?
Yeah.
Very nice. So fun. And you guys live in Brazil, but where?
We live in Rio.
Okay. Nice.
And I'm from here.
Go ahead.
I've lived in other places in Brazil. I've never lived in another country. I've lived in other places here, but I'm from here, and I live here now for a while already.
Brazil is definitely on my list, like top 5 countries that I want to visit. So one day I will make it.
Oh, I'm sure you'll love it.
Yes. And so you guys do English and Portuguese for...
We do English and Portuguese, yeah. I was raised in a multilingual environment. My parents were missionaries, and we were in a missionary group where we lived in the same house with a bunch of other families. Mm-hmm. And then, so we spoke English all the time.
Okay. Wow.
Sorry.
So that's how you learned.
Yeah, so that's how I learned from birth. English and Portuguese.
Yeah, because I was gonna say your English is amazing, and you're saying how nervous you are, but I'm listening and it's amazing.
I guess I'm more concerned about vocabulary. You know where you get stuck with like
right.
Have a little difficulty expressing myself sometimes. But
I can fill in the gaps if needed, but
okay, thanks.
I'm just happy that we're doing this in English because I can't speak Portuguese.
No, and I think most of us here, most of the people who are watching us now understand at least a basic level of English. So there might be some things that people will have a little trouble with, but if there is, and I don't think there will be, later we'll try to find a way of, maybe I'll do some posts in Portuguese with like highlighting the things that you shared and stuff.
Sure, and a lot of the vocabulary about bilingualism, I feel like a lot of the words are similar, like the word bilingualism.
Yeah, that's true.
I know in Spanish, bilinguismo. So,
yes.
Yeah. And then one more question I had for you is, what's your family language context? Is it all English at home? Is it mixed?
So my husband doesn't really speak English. Well, he speaks some. Okay. He's learned a lot from us, but he's not fluent. So most of the time when I'm speaking to the kids, it's just English. But when I speak to him, it's in Portuguese. And then when we're having a family conversation, it's kind of half and half because if he doesn't understand what we're saying, I'll either translate for him or my daughter will translate for him, which is like the cutest thing.
Yeah.
I love that when your daughter starts doing that with your friends and relatives.
I know.
But and so she does that sometimes, but most of the time it's just, well, we speak Portuguese with each other, but it's interesting how that doesn't affect
The kids.
her language with me.
Yeah.
Like she still speaks English with me all the time, and she speaks English with my son too.
That's huge.
So it's like, it's our thing. Yeah, and it's something that we've talked about, like this is our language, we speak English amongst ourselves.
Awesome.
We've already been through a couple of crises, like nobody else speaks English at school because her school is not bilingual.
Yeah.
So she's realized that there are a number of people who aren't like her, although we have a lot of friends who speak English with her too, so that helps a lot.
Yeah.
And but it's funny how at home it isn't an issue.
Yeah.
Like speaking English or Portuguese. At home it's just English.
Well, that probably speaks to how you guys have implemented your family plan and have made it very consistent. And I guess that's one of the things we're talking about today. Yeah. But it sounds like you guys are doing such a great job, and you're getting to that. She's 4, right? So school age is when these big conversations come up typically with families, because up until then, maybe they're in preschool or play groups, but for the most part, kids are hearing their parents and other caregivers, and that's where their language is coming from. But she sounds like she's right at the age where it's now peers, friends, outside influence. So good job.
It's funny because with the pandemic, thank you. With the pandemic and being at home all the time, her English has gotten much stronger.
Wow. And
her Portuguese is now a little, she's had a lot of situations where she looks at me and says, I don't know how to say this in Portuguese. Wow. And then she asks me to tell her what that word is, and then she'll go and tell her dad or whatever. Yeah. But it's not something that's a problem. Right. It doesn't bother her that this will happen, but it's happened a bit since this started.
Yeah.
It's interesting because then we can really see how important it is to have the child exposed to the language so that they can really develop in that sense.
Yes, definitely. Well, fun.
So I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, like a little bit about your background, how you started this whole bilingual journey thing.
Sure. Okay, so my name's Kaila, for those who don't know. I live with my husband and my daughter right outside of Washington, D.C., and on the Virginia side, if anybody is familiar. My daughter is 7 months old, so I'm fairly new to the whole mom thing. But as far as my bilingualism journey, I started learning Spanish when I was about 1 year old, and my parents are not Spanish speaking. My mom really likes the language, and so she took it in high school and college. My dad doesn't really know anything in Spanish. But they both, more my mom than my dad, but my mom was very motivated to have me learn it from a young age. So she had me in a daycare that spoke Spanish, and then later on I was in classes, and so that was kind of her putting me on that path. And then later when I was older, I really, really did enjoy language. It was like one of my favorite things. I would make up my own languages. I studied Greek and Latin. Language was my thing. So by the time I got to college, I knew that I wanted to study linguistics, and specifically in a route of being able to teach language. And I always have loved working with kids. So for me, childhood bilingualism was something I wanted to focus on. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I got to where I am now.
I love that. Yeah. I think you're really passionate about it, and that is what makes it so great to hear you talk about bilingualism and teaching children a new language and having a whole second language at home and everything. So thank you for sharing so much with us. So I wanted to ask you, like, based on your experience and how your parents weren't bilingual, but then you had this opportunity to be raised as a bilingual child and everything, how important is it to you to give this experience to your daughter? Like how
dedicated, how
great is your desire to have a bilingual daughter, and how does that affect your dedication to the process?
That's a really good question, especially I think because each parent has their own language situation themselves. Like you mentioned, my parents weren't bilingual, but my mom was motivated for me to be. And then for me, I am very passionate about bilingualism in kids, but for me, it's almost more of like from a skill perspective. Like I think it's really cool to be able to speak 2 languages. And so for that reason, I want Aniela, my daughter, to also be able to speak both languages, be able to communicate with 2 groups of people. But then if you ask my husband, why is it important for you that Aniela speaks Spanish? For him, it's a heritage thing. It's his identity in being a Mexican American. Spanish is so much a part of his identity. So my answer would be I'm very dedicated, but from like how cool it is like to speak 2 languages. But I think a lot of parents would identify more with my husband saying, I want to pass on my language to my child. But
I think a lot of people who are with us here share that feeling. A lot of us are Brazilians who are living abroad and have this struggle to, share their heritage language with their children. So it's great that you have both sides to talk about and to share, because sometimes I think it's even harder to pass on a heritage language than to be like in my case where I'm in Brazil and I am teaching, I am sharing English with my kids, but it's not, well, it's sort of like a heritage language for me because it is part of my identity because it's always been my life.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm not American, so I don't have like, it's funny because I kind of feel like I'm part of a different culture, but I'm not.
Yeah. Well, it's part of your story. It's part of your journey. So.
Yeah. So it is really important to me in that sense too. But yeah, there is a lot of this, like, it's so cool to be bilingual and to be able to access people from everywhere, because you have a second language.
Right.
And English especially is such a privileged language. Yeah. You can communicate basically wherever you go. So
true.
I think that is really something that weighs on our decision to raise bilingual children. And I think it's so cool that your mom was already so interested in it, because I think that must have had a big impact on your desire to learn also. So if she was able to affect you in that sense and cause such an impact, imagine how much more you will be able to make a difference for Aniela.
Well, that's why I love that she did that. Like, I'm just super grateful, but it's also such a good example to parents who aren't native speakers and want to use a language that's not their native language, which is like what I'm doing. But even a step further, parents who aren't bilingual, but
don't speak that. Yeah,
exactly. They desire that for their kids. There's a way to still go about that. And so I think that's encouraging.
For sure.
Yeah.
So let me see, I wrote some notes here. I want to make sure I asked you.
Right.
So do you think that this question, like how important is it to you, it makes a difference in how consistent we are able to be with our children in our bilingual mission? Because it, like, I think, in my opinion, I think okay, I'm a little stuck here. I think that the more we want this, the further we are willing to go, and the more we are willing to invest in this process. And I think it is demanding.
Yes.
And someone shared this today or yesterday, saying that raising bilingual children is not a sprint; it's a marathon.
Yeah.
No, not a marathon. No,
it's not a sprint. It's a marathon.
Not a sprint. It's a marathon. Right. So it's something that is a long process. It's not something that you're just going to do and it's done. So you really have to know that this is something you want and that you are going to be dedicated to this on continuously. So
well, exactly. So you stated it so perfectly. You have to have the desire strong enough to be able then to put in the work. Because I mean, we're in this bilingualism circle, and so we see on a daily basis that it's hard work and that parents know that. But I think if you talk to parents who kind of just passively want their kids to be bilingual, or, I want my daughter to speak my language, Spanish, let's say, but they're not doing anything active to actually accomplish that, it's going to be really hard. It takes a lot of dedication, like you said. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of planning. it takes a lot of, like, you're going to run into obstacles and getting over those obstacles. So you have to really want it. You have to decide, okay, this is something that's very important to me, so I'm going to work at it no matter what obstacles come up. So 100%, yeah, you have to be.
I think that what you said about planning is really important, because I think a lot of people kind of only realize how difficult, how challenging this is once they're in the situation and they're dealing with a child who doesn't want to speak the language, or a number of situations that can occur. And I think that the planning, if you are able to sit down and make a plan, and we're going to talk about this a little bit still further on, but I think that is something that is really important to mention here. Like, if you want to be consistent, make a plan.
Yeah, make a plan.
And it doesn't have to be something so complicated, just simple. Think about, okay, this is my goal. How am I going to achieve this goal? Decide what your steps are going to be, I guess, what strategy you're going to use. So I heard you on your podcast say something about, you mentioned something about family language policy. I think that's something that we could talk about a little bit, because it comes into this planning thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like this overarching thing for bilingual parenting, for raising bilingual kids. It's kind of like, it's always there. Even if you don't sit down and establish with words, this is our family language policy, everyone at the end of the day has a family language policy. And if you haven't established it with words, it's probably just whatever has naturally come about in your home. So the families who are just, they live in a bilingual community where everybody in their kind of general area speaks their two languages, they kind of fall into that pattern at home. So their family language policy is, we speak two languages at home, whatever feels natural, whenever it feels natural. And then on the other side of the extreme, if you're living kind of like in your situation, so you're surrounded by Portuguese, but you have carved out specifically the need for wanting, or the want to do English at home. So your language policy is, we're going to incorporate English, even though it's hard, even though it's not out in the community. Our language policy is, mom's going to speak English with the kids. It sounds like you said dad's going to speak Portuguese. Maybe he's going to speak some English when he is able to use what he knows.
He does.
And so, I mean, if you want to, why don't you elaborate, if I don't want to say what your language policy is, because I don't know. So.
Oh, no, but that's it. That's it.
Okay. So then that's a language policy that you've more consciously put into effect. But everybody has a language policy, even if they haven't ever sat down and thought about it. So that's kind of what it is. Language policy is just, family language policy is, this is how our family looks at language. This is who speaks what in what contexts. And I think it's really helpful to do it consciously, because it just kind of gets everybody on the same page. Especially bring the kids into that conversation when they're really little. Like in my case, my husband and I talked about it when I was pregnant. Okay, I mean, this is obviously my field, so I've been thinking about it for years and years. But if the kids are young, the parents can sit down and be like, okay, this is what's important to us. This is what we want to do. But as soon as the child is old enough to be cognitive about what's going on, bring them in on that conversation. Hey, our family really values bilingualism. We love the fact that we can speak two languages. Because of that, mommy's going to speak in Portuguese and daddy's going to speak in Spanish. I don't know. There could be a family here in the U.S. where they're doing one parent, one language, but both are minority languages. So bringing in the kids into that conversation just makes that family language policy even stronger. But that's kind of what it is.
Definitely.
Hopefully that answered the question.
I think it's great that you gave this example of like where a child is a little older, because some people may start later on in life, not like us, before we even had our babies. We already knew what we wanted to do, and we had already discussed this thoroughly with our husbands. And I think that is really great for whoever has the opportunity to sit down and say, look, this is how it's going to be, and plan this out beforehand, because I think it's easier for us to deal with things later on because we're already very aware of how we want to do this. But if you're starting this now and your child is a little older, it's still okay. You can still do this, and you can and should include the child in this conversation. I think that's also really important.
Yes.
Not just from one day to the next start speaking English with the child. What?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that'll probably just cause a little more resistance, and so we don't want that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's great.
Exactly. Yeah, include them in on the conversation about it.
Okay, let me.
I know.
Sorry.
I have the notes for those who are watching. We have the whole document of.
Yeah, we have notes because we don't want to leave anything out.
I have it right out here too.
Okay, so yeah, so that continuing from what I was just saying, kids will tend to reject the language if, depending on a number of situations. This might be one of them. Just springing a new language on them and with no notice,
Yes.
might not be a good idea.
Right.
And I think there are other things that may cause children to not respond in the language. I have some people here who send me messages saying that their greatest challenge at the moment is this: they speak English with their child and the child just won't answer in English. And do you have any advice for those people who's dealing with that?
Well, and you feel free to add on if you have any other ideas, but I have the same thing happen where lots of people ask me that question. So it must be a very, very common thing. That kids eventually get to a point where they start to reject their family's language, whether it's in a very vocal way, like, I don't like that language, I don't want to talk in that language. Sometimes it happens like that. I've seen in different situations, but it might be a little bit more subtle where they're just, every time you speak to them in the target language, they respond back in the majority language. So it can happen in all sorts of different ways. And I think the biggest thing is just to stay consistent and then go back to that family language policy and just kind of be open about talking with your child about, hey, remember, I'm talking to you in this language because why? Because we really value bilingualism. So mommy's going to keep talking to you in this language and I want you to be able to respond to me in this language. So just consistent and going back to the plan. But then there's different strategies you can implement. And a lot of things, because I also run some immersion programs, and so it might not be a thing where the kid is rejecting the language, but we have a lot of kids come in where they just don't know the language yet. They don't know Spanish, which is what we're teaching. And so these techniques also work in that case. But there's two things that we do. The first is called parroting, parrot like the bird, and where they will say something to you and you echo back what they said, but in the target language.
In the other language.
Because if you think,
I do that. I had no idea that was
well, there you go.
that had a name. I love it. I love learning this new name.
Well, because it's really, one of the things I don't like to see is if a child is expressing something to the adult they're talking to and they get ignored because they didn't say it in the right language. And so what parroting does, it echoes back what the child said. Like, I did hear you. This is what you just said to me. But then it's also giving them the language around those feelings they're having, because they might truly not know.
Filling in the gaps, maybe they don't know how to say that.
Filling in the gaps, or maybe they're just not fully comfortable expressing what they just said because they haven't heard it said that way yet. And so you're just providing them with more input. So that's one strategy. So they say something to you, you say it back to them. And a lot of times you change it, like they say it like, I fell off my bike, and then, oh, te caíste de la bicicleta, but they're still hearing the verb, they're hearing the word bicicleta there. Yeah. So that's a big thing that I recommend, is to pair it and just continuously do that, and it just goes with the consistency. And then once that's more consistent, you can go a level up, which is to redirect. So if they come over and they said, I can't find my shoe, then you redirect and you say, I'm doing this in Spanish, but ¿qué no puedes encontrar? So you then ask them a question about what they just said, but you're now saying it in the target language, which kind of a lot of times redirects them into then, mis zapatos, no puedo encontrar mis zapatos. So
they won't even realize what they're
doing.
They'll just.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah. I don't know if you have anything to add about what you have seen.
No, I was going to say about the parroting. I think that it's something that we do even if we are speaking only one language with our children. It's what you do when you want them to learn their verbs properly or something. It's something that you just do. So you can do it with two languages the same, and it's easy, it's simple, and it's not putting any pressure on the children.
Right.
It's you're offering them support.
Yes.
I think, so
they
can feel more comfortable and safer.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I said they feel more comfortable and safer in this context than if they were obligated to speak the language.
Exactly. They feel
with their
safer.
parents.
They feel more heard. And it's an alternative to be like, instead of yelling like, hey, that's not the language we use, or I'm not going to listen to you because you didn't use the right language, or just because in general I don't tend to favor policing other people's language, including kids. So it's a nice gentle way to encourage them.
I think also like what you were saying about policing other people's language, I think this is something that happens with us bilingual parents. Sometimes other people will want to police our language with our children, and that is another issue, another big issue for bilingual families, where we have people who their greatest challenge is dealing with criticism or the lack of information maybe from their relatives and friends. My baby's crying.
I know. You need to go grab him.
To deal with it. And so I'm a little, but I think this is a big issue. Like, how do I deal with outside interference, and how can I bring people into my
get them on
bilingual plan? Yeah.
Do you need to go grab him and I can talk about that question?
No, I think I'm gonna wait. Is it really distracting?
I don't mind, but I know that as a parent, you're always like, my child, your brain.
He should stop soon, but.
But on that note, my daughter's sleeping, so if she does wake up, and I will probably have to go around and grab her. But anyway. So
okay, I'll go get him. You can start, and I'll go.
Sounds good. So the question, just to reiterate, was if you have family members that are not necessarily on board with bilingual parenting, or maybe you have people who are saying, oh, that's not the way to do it, you should do it this way. Like maybe you've chosen to speak only the target language at home, which is what we do. Hi, buddy. I think I saw a comment that asked what did we do with Spanish at home? Both my husband and I do speak Spanish at home with my daughter. So maybe that's what you've chosen, but then you have outside voices saying, well, shouldn't you be doing one parent, one language? Like, shouldn't you have him, since he's a native speaker, do Spanish, and you, since you're a native English speaker, do English? There's always going to be people saying things. There's always going to be other opinions about everything in the entire realm of parenting. Everything. If you're vegan, if you're if your kids don't play with plastic toys, if your kids don't watch TV, exactly. So if your kids don't eat sugar, there's always going to be outside opinions, and so each family has to determine what's best for them. That's just the way it's got to be. But then in terms of relatives, because that is a more touchy subject, with outside opinions, it's like, we got this, goodbye. But when it's a relative, right, you're like, oh, well, they think this, like their opinion, especially grandparents, right? Grandparents, in-laws, and your own parents, exactly. Yeah. And again, you can add on how you think is best to deal with this, but one thing that I found really helpful is recruiting them to the mission. So telling them, this is my plan, this is bilingualism, this is why it's important to my family, we need your help. And if you kind of get them on board, it like gives them like that power. Because you give them a really positive view of the whole situation. Like, I'm not excluding you. Exactly. No, you have a really important job in this plan. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So they kind of feel more empowered. Oh, okay, I'm part of the mission. Like in my own situation, my mom knows a lot of Spanish because of all the years that we worked on it. So she doesn't feel left out, but she definitely feels way more comfortable in English. And so I told her, I'm not needing you to be a source of input in Spanish if that's not what you're comfortable in. Aniela needs English input as well. So you are part of this mission, but you are one of the awesome sources of English input that she's getting. So it just kind of, and then with my nieces and nephews, they are all very bilingual, but they grew up in the U.S. They speak Spanish at home, but they grew up in the U.S., so they really favor English at this point. They're 17 years old down to 6. But I've told them too, like, okay, Aniela really needs you guys to help her learn Spanish. You guys know how fluent you guys are in Spanish. Aniela needs your help so that she can also be fluent in Spanish. So that's the biggest thing I think you can do with relatives who are not fully on board, is just help them see why it's so awesome, and then get them, give them a part of the mission. I think something that really helps is when the child starts speaking the language. Like, this was something that I saw happen
with friends, people I never imagined, I never knew they spoke English.
Yeah.
Once my daughter started speaking English, people started speaking English to her.
Wow.
It was just something that would happen naturally. And I would even say, look, it's okay. You don't have to speak English. She understands Portuguese. Although when she started speaking, she spoke a lot more English than Portuguese because she spent most of the time with me. It was like 80-20, you know, she had like 80% English, 20% Portuguese because my husband was working, and so she had a lot of vocabulary. She had a lot of vocabulary in English, and she was always very expressive and very vocal about her feelings and her ideas. She still is, but so people wanted to speak English with her because it was so cute. Yeah. So I think like maybe with your nieces and nephews, when she starts speaking Spanish, it's going to be so cute. Yeah. They're going to want to speak Spanish with her too, and that'll help.
That's such a great point. I didn't even think about that, but yeah. Hi, bud.
What's the matter? What's the matter? Where's my kitty cat? What's the matter?
I think I did have another note about the relatives.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, just like what you're saying. So in the beginning years, when it's 80-20, if a child is getting way more input at home, their language skills might be far stronger in that language. So when they're out and about at the playground or when a babysitter comes, there might be some of that confusion in those early years. But I really think it ends up only being those early years where the confusion really becomes an issue. Because our goal for our kids is bilingualism, not monolingualism in a minority language. Our goal is bilingualism. Mm-hmm. So eventually when they start really hitting that part, when they're a little bit older, where their languages are, of course, they're never balanced because that doesn't exist. But when they are more balanced, the confusion isn't there. And so the relatives start to see, okay, everything's fine. I can communicate with my granddaughter or the babysitter. Everything's fine. I got this. So the confusion is temporary. It's worth that initial confusion because then you get to the reward of bilingualism.
Oh yeah, this sort of happened here. Like with my in-laws don't speak English. My whole family speaks English. My mom, my siblings, so they speak English with my kids too. Although we live far away, they live like on the other end of the country. This is my sister here, so they speak English with my kids too, and that really helps. But mostly like over the phone and like when my mom comes to visit and stuff. But then my in-laws that we see all the time don't speak English. So at first, like my daughter, we would go to their house and she sometimes would she would use hand gestures, and she found her way of communicating with them when she didn't know how to say what she wanted to say, but she could understand everything that they said. And I wasn't so concerned about it initially, and I think you even said something like this in one of your podcasts that I listened to lately. And I think it's fine. Like at that first, in the beginning, like I really focused on English, and I wasn't so worried about if she was getting her Portuguese like to the same level, because I was like, okay, I want to create a really strong base for English, because I know that Portuguese she will have. Portuguese is for granted because we live in Brazil, we will live in Brazil, we are Brazilian, etc.
Yes.
English, no. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to keep this up, to this level. So I really focused on that, and I didn't worry so much. Like it was only an issue. I love you too. It was only an issue when we were in situations like that where I could tell that she wanted to say something that she would say easily in English and she couldn't really say in Portuguese. Yeah. But that was for a short while, and then when she went to school, when she started school, she is not in a bilingual school, so just everything there was in Portuguese. And then in a matter of like 2 weeks, she was speaking Portuguese really well. She wouldn't even mix anymore at school, like with her teachers and her friends. Yeah. So it's something that they also adapt so easily.
Well, that's a good story to tell. Like, I think a lot of times people are really dying to hear those kinds of stories, that it will be okay if we only do the minority language. What happens when they get to kindergarten? Will they be confused? And so a story like that makes people feel a little bit more reassured. Okay. Because, I've seen...
Like, it's going to work. It's going to work out.
What did you say?
It's going to work out. Yeah, I don't have to be so... Because I think that one of the greatest issues with... Yeah, she drew on the house. Is that we are afraid of what might happen or not happen depending on our actions. So I think one of the like keys to raising bilingual children is having information about this, like knowing as much as we can about how is the development of a bilingual child, how do they learn, how is this process, and like what are the strategies that I can use. Yes, honey. A book? You want a book? We'll get a book. We'll get a book.
Yeah, but being informed, like you said, that's huge. Like, do your research.
It's empowering, like you said.
Yeah, the more you know, the less you'll have doubts about. I mean, there's going to be obstacles that come about, but at least you'll know. Okay, I've heard people talk about this. It's okay. It's normal. Even with just raising a baby, there's things that I have heard other people talk about. So when she does start having a sleep regression, it's okay. I've heard about this. It's not a big deal. It's just a phase. So same thing with bilingualism, just being informed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sharing stories and hearing other people's experience is always so helpful. Yeah. I think that is one of the main reasons that we are on here.
Yeah.
I started this Nuga de Bilingue account exactly to kind of, she was already 2 when I started, and she was already bilingual. And, I looked at the situation, I was like, wow, this works. It's working. And people would stop me like on the street and ask me about it. Why are you speaking English? Are you American? And is your husband American? So it was something that attracted so much attention, and people were so curious and so interested about it that I was like, okay, I'm going to start sharing this somehow that I can. And I think that as we share our story, we hear other people's stories, and there's always something that we can get and learn from each other. So this is so great. One of the things that I learned here that I used with her at the moment of crisis when she was questioning the whole bilingual thing was saying that it's a superpower. Yeah. And I've heard you say that too, and I think it worked really well. Like when she started saying she didn't want to speak English, it was one day she got home from school, and there had been a situation at school where I didn't know at the time. Her teacher told me the next day. They had gone into some classrooms. They were like getting to know the school, and they had gone into classrooms where there were older children. Yeah. And for some reason, in one of the classes that they went to, the kids knew that she spoke English, because I speak English with her all the time, even at school. I love that. When I go to pick her up, when I go to drop her off. So sometimes people notice, right? Yeah. And then, oh, she speaks English. Say something in English. Say something in English. And she was so embarrassed that she didn't want to. She's really she loves being on stage and in the spotlight. But at that moment, she just. Yeah, her teacher said she was so embarrassed. And then when she got home, she was like, I don't want to speak English anymore. Nobody speaks English, blah, blah, blah. And then I started reminding her of all of our friends who spoke English, all of her friends, her age, that speak English, that she has a relationship with, on a daily basis. Well, not daily, but frequently. She sees frequently. And we are so lucky to have this. Not everyone has this. But it was really good to
remind her of that. That's so cute.
Yeah, remind her of that, and then tell her, look, it's like a superpower. You can talk to different people that you wouldn't be able to talk to if you didn't speak. And then quickly she got over it. She never spoke of it again.
Oh, that's such. I love that. That's a really interesting little anecdote.
Yeah.
Hi, buddy. Did you find your book?
Did
you find your books?
Yes, lots of books here. You want to show Kaila your book?
Ooh, is that a nice book?
Lost and Found.
Are they in snow?
Sound.
That's so cute.
So I think this is also a big issue, dealing with the children and dealing with the in-laws. And I think there might be a question here. Let's see. Also, your motivation. Look. Oh yeah, somebody who's talking about heritage language. Yeah, your motivation can be intrinsic, because you have this thing of my child will be able to communicate with my family, and I think that is a huge motivator.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many different reasons people may have for why they've chosen bilingualism. There's so many different motivators.
Honey, you're a little distracting.
He's so cute. He's so cute.
Daddy, no, you don't want to go with Daddy. He's just started doing this. He calls my husband Papai, because that's how we say daddy in Portuguese. But when he's talking about my husband to me, he says daddy. And this is something that he started doing like last week. So I'm really proud of this.
That's so cute. I wonder about that because my husband has said he wants to be papi. That's just normal for him. So we're always like, ¿Dónde está papi? Papi, papi, papi. But sometimes he will even introduce himself or say daddy. He's like, okay, daddy te va a ayudar. Daddy's going to help you. So he's even in between what his dad name is. So I'm curious what Daniela will end up calling her dad. Will it be papi? Will it be both?
Oh, it's gonna work out. Yes, she's probably gonna call him papi. Probably.
Yeah, that's more consistent.
Papi? Yeah, papi. He used to call me mamãe, which is funny because I don't refer to myself as mamãe at all, like ever. I am mama always. I always mama this, mama that, and he just wouldn't say mama. He would just say mamãe. Huh. And also recently, like a couple of weeks ago, he started saying mommy and mama. Oh. But he says mommy more, right, honey?
Who are you sitting with? Is that your mommy?
Who am I? Where's mommy?
He's like, I got my book. Yeah. I'm good. Well, I do have a language map. Do you want me to show?
Oh, I did want you to show the language maps. The language map, you started doing your language map before she was born, like years before you had a child, right? But this is something that people can also do even if they already have their baby or they already have their child and they're starting to plan their bilingual project. I'd say. Yeah. It's something that can really help, right?
Yes. Yeah, it can be done.
I'm so glad you were able to make one to show us.
This is one I had made earlier. I ended up making a copy.
It's beautiful.
So you explained it you pretty much covered it, but it's something I learned when I was studying. I was in Peru. I was studying language communities of different indigenous languages that were either going extinct or in danger of going extinct. And so this language map idea didn't come from anything bilingualism, or it didn't come from anything child bilingualism related. It was a way for people in communities with their native language going extinct to be able to start showing in a map where the language still exists. And it was visual representation for them to see, oh wow, our language isn't spoken very many places. We need to change that. So it was a really cool idea that sparked the idea for me to then do it with our students, and then I made one for our family before Aniela was even born. But the idea is you draw out a visual representation of every place that you go. So I made this one for our elementary school students to do. So we have their house, we have their relative's house right here, school. This just represents friends. It's a little soccer field. Bilinguitos, which was our school. And then they could fill in other places. But when you do this as a family, you can do it from scratch. Just get a big piece of paper, draw your house, draw places you go. When I customized it, I had Starbucks. I had, I think, the library. And then I forget what my third store was. But wherever you go frequently, you can draw it out. And then if your kids are old enough to get involved, you do a color for each of your languages. So English can be yellow, Spanish can be red, Portuguese can be green, like if you have 3 languages. And then you shade in your different places with how much language you speak, how much of each language you speak in those places. So for example, if you only speak Portuguese at home, then your house would be all green for your Portuguese color, or whatever color. But maybe you have relatives that speak English, so then that would all be purple, whatever color I said. Maybe you go to an all English school and they have a Spanish class there, so a little bit of Spanish. So you just customize it for whatever. But then
I'm just gonna take him to my husband real quick.
Sounds good.
It's really right now, but I'll be right back.
I'll start describing. Yes. So for those watching, it's just a visual representation where you can then look at it and see, oh, we have a lot of Spanish and English, but not a lot of Portuguese. How can we start to implement more Portuguese in more domains of our life? Or, whatever colors, whatever languages. it's just something really helpful to be able to see it visually mapped out in all the different places you go. And it's really helpful for the kids too, if they're old enough to understand that. And it ends up kind of bringing them back to like, oh, okay, now I see why we're doing this. I see a lot of English on our map, but not much Portuguese or not much Spanish or not much Hindi or not much whatever language you speak. So I think it's really helpful. I'm just saying it's really helpful as a visual representation, because it makes it very obvious.
No, I love it. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, it makes it obvious where you need to help bridge the gap between lots of majority language, community language, and not as much of your target language. Yeah,
definitely. And another thing that you shared that I thought was really interesting, I never got to do it, and I won't, because I'm not planning on having any more babies, but I loved the idea, and if I could go back in time, I would have done it, was the journaling for the baby.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
Because I think, like, when I was pregnant, I started trying to speak to the baby in English. I think you need to get it started, and it's a great way to start the habit of speaking the language with your child. But I think journaling would be is a really good one too, because you'll also work on other things like writing, and I think it helps you also to enrich your vocabulary and everything. So it's a really good idea. Journaling is not something that we do a lot here in Brazil. Like, at least I don't know many people who have had this habit from a young age. I think maybe nowadays a lot of people are starting to do this more, but it's not very cultural here, I think. We have diaries and stuff, but it's not really the same. I don't know.
Yeah.
So how would you do it? You would like write letters to your daughter?
Yes. Let me see if I can find it. I might have it like right in my bookshelf, my very messy bookshelf over there. Actually, I do see it. So I didn't do it nearly as frequently as I could have. Also, we didn't know if Aniela was going to be a boy or a girl. We never found out the gender until she was born. So they ended up being pretty generic letters, little short letters, like, we just had our 20-week ultrasound, we got to see you moving around, things like that. But it was all in Spanish, like you said, to start just making that our language of our relationship between me and Aniela, even before she was born. And another thing you can totally do, like you said, you wanted to speak, you started talking to your belly in English from the get-go. But one of the cool things about, like you said, journaling is that you have it then preserved. So I can show this to her one day and be like,
oh yeah, that's so special.
Little llamas.
So cute.
And so I can show her, like, look, this is what I was thinking about. This is what, and it's very personally addressed. Well, it's not, it doesn't say Aniela. Like I said, we didn't know who was in there, but
that's also special. Like, her understanding how you felt about not even knowing who she was going to be. I think it also adds to the preciousness of the journal.
Well, I think even when we had kind of decided what names we liked for a boy and what names we liked for a girl, I think I wrote them in here, even though we had never announced them until she was born. It was like, somewhere in one of these entries it says, okay, your dad finally agreed on these names and I'm super excited. I don't know who you are yet, but these are what we
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. But it just helps you as the parent establish that relationship. Okay, I speak in Spanish for me. I speak in Spanish to this baby. And it just kind of helped reinforce that. And by the time she was born, that felt so natural. When she was born, right off the bat, I started speaking to her in Spanish. And like I said, even though that's not my native language, it felt natural because we had already established that. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea for non-native speakers, especially.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, for everyone, but I think for us, it's a really good idea because, like you said, adapting to using the language full time with the child it's great if you can start before the baby's born. So why not?
Yeah, I agree.
And then there you also have the letters that she will read or he will read eventually, and that's really
right.
I actually wrote a couple
for them to make sure that
I wrote a couple of letters to my daughter when I was pregnant.
Yeah.
Because I had lost a baby before, and so she was my rainbow baby, and I was really insecure in the beginning, of the first months, and I wrote a couple of like really really sad I don't know if this is gonna work, and then I stopped for some reason. I had actually kind of started, and then I didn't keep up the habit. I think,
Life gets in the way.
Now when I think about it, I think, that would have been really great if I had been able to keep it up. But so here's the idea for those of you who still can. Do it.
Yes.
Do it. It'll be great. And the kids will love it. I mean, my daughter loves looking at photos of her birth and things like that. So I think that she would also love to have access to letters.
Yeah, it's part of their story, so they love that.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I really liked that you mentioned was like I said here, we have access to people who speak our minority language. So that's great because my children can have contact with these people, and it doesn't feel so, the minority language doesn't feel so minor.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that, having the multilingual playgroups, I thought that was a really good idea. That concept of having, other cultures and other languages. How do you guys, do you have any of those there?
Yeah. So in our area, we've started what we call Grupo Play, and it's a play group for bilingual families. Definitely Spanish English is our majority, but the group is for bilingual families in general, because for my area, Spanish is super common. So like you were saying, you have the benefit of having a lot of English speakers around, even though that's not the majority language. That's the same case here. Mm-hmm. So English is all around, but there's a lot of Spanish. So if you want to find Spanish, it's pretty easy. The library does story times.
That's great.
Things like that. But if you are a family that has a language that's not as common, we have one of our bilingüitas families, maybe she'll watch this. They do, the mom is from Estonia. So she speaks Estonian, but she also speaks Russian. And they chose to do Russian and English as their main languages at home, and Spanish. But Russian is not as common. You can't go to the library and find a Russian story time. Mm-hmm. You don't have lots of moms groups where there's lots of Russian speakers. And so I think what I was saying on the podcast, what you're mentioning, is that if you can't find a group that's specifically Russian English, you could start one. But before you go through all of that, just make connections with other bilingual families, because it won't be extra Russian input, but they're going to understand the struggles of raising a bilingual child, the joys of raising a bilingual child. You guys will just have a lot in common. And for the kids to see.
And it's good for the children and the parents, right?
Right. The kids to see, oh, okay, there are other kids that speak 2 languages. I don't know that language, Russian, but I see that he has the superpower too. So exactly. It's not the same as having all of the families that are also Russian English, but it's definitely a starting point to get connected with other bilingual families.
Well, yeah, I think that if you don't have other people who speak your minority language, having this group will be very helpful.
Yeah, it's
we actually support. Had a while ago we had a small group. It didn't last very long, but it was a group, because here in Rio we have a lot of foreigners, so it's easy to find this. And then there were groups on Facebook, and we kind of started meeting up. One was Australian, one mom was Australian, the other was German, the other was from, I can't remember, Sweden or something. So it was great. The kids, they basically spoke English amongst themselves, and us, the moms too.
Yeah.
But it was really nice, to be in that space where everybody kind of had a different story, and like you said, it becomes more natural to the children to see I'm not the only person who has the superpower.
Yeah.
It's really great.
Well, in this day and age, especially even more so now with COVID, everything online is becoming so much more streamlined, or it's just so many more options are available now that people are comfortable with doing things online. So for that family I was referencing, Russian English, if you can't find other Russian English families in your area online, I'm sure there's tons. So you could start a virtual play group, in addition to the bilingual play group that you might find in your own area.
Yeah, that's really great. You said something also about recording the children's progress in the language. I think that was really interesting, because sometimes we don't take so much notice. Like I was just saying about my son, sometimes we don't realize these little things that they are doing and how they're evolving. So it's nice to have kind of like maybe a journal or something where we also record this. I don't know, how do you imagine this this recording?
If you think about a parent who's recording everything, like, oh, my child rolled over, they did their first ma syllable, like just a monolingual family. You know how people will write down those things or do it on your phone, like I'm doing it on my phone right now. Aniela just climbed up the stairs yesterday, so I wrote that down. But a similar thing for language-specific milestones, it's whatever people are comfortable with. If they want a hard copy of a journal, or if they want to do it in the notes in their phone. I think another thing would be cool to do a video, maybe every 3 months, every 6 months, of a similar conversation with your child. That way you can eventually look back on lots of milestones or lots of checkpoints and see how far they've come. I don't know. Do you do anything like that with your kids?
I'm not disciplined enough to do it.
I know. It takes extra planning.
I would love to.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I don't. Like, what I do sometimes is when they say things that I really like, or these funny words that they say, I write down. Sometimes I have like a glossary where I write words that they use, for example, either in Portuguese or in English. Like my son says the gruffalo, he calls him walkie. So I think that's adorable. I never want to forget it. So I write down walkie is the gruffalo and things like that. But not so much in this sense. Like I could write down, for example, he just started referring to daddy as papai and as daddy when he's speaking to me. It would be nice, I think, even to share maybe with people so they could see kind of a little more of our process. I need to be more organized. Well,
me too. I'm not an organized person, so it's not something that comes naturally, but it's the same thing like the discipline of journaling. I did really well with those journaling to the baby while I was pregnant for like the first half, and then it kind of trickled off. So the same thing. It's just an idea. It's a goal to aim for, and so whatever progress you track is better than none.
Yeah. Anything that we can get down is something.
Yeah.
So.
And honestly,
but it's also.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, also it's good to know that there are these possibilities, because sometimes we won't have these ideas just on our own. So I think it's so great that we get to hear possibilities.
Yeah, well,
things that we can
wish that I had more progress from when I was a kid. Like now that I'm doing all this bilingualism stuff, and it's very much my career in my life, I think it would be really cool to have, projects that I did when I was in elementary school and taking Spanish class. Or I know that every year in my Spanish class, we would do a play or like a skit. So all the kids in the class would act out whatever the skit we wrote for the parents, like a little play, a little presentation. And I remember asking all my friends that I still keep up with from that class, does anyone have video of that? Because I want to see little 9-year-old Kaila talking Spanish for this skit, but I don't have that. I don't have that evidence anywhere. I don't have that, and so I can do that for Aniela. Like I will have all of the progress that I end up tracking. Whatever I track will be cool for her to look back on whenever she's older.
I think also having like this, being on Instagram or having a blog, or it's also a way of kind of keeping all of this in one space where they can come back to. They can come back to this in the future and see a little bit of their process. It's really, really special.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone's tracking progress in different ways. So exactly.
So yeah, it is a good thing to do so that we can, even if we want to look back on it later on. So like, I don't remember some things about my daughter, like about her process. I imagine this was 4 years ago. So we forget things.
One of my professors,
recording.
He was my phonology and phonetics professor, so he was very much focused on speech sounds. But he said that when he had his son, every month at the beginning, and then maybe every 3 months, he would do a little audio recording every night. Not every night, but every time that they would do the audio recording, it was when he was getting his son ready for bed. And so they always were talking about the same things: pajamas, brushing your teeth, blah, blah, blah. And he would record for about 30 minutes. And then he had all these, so it wasn't when he was really little, it was when he was starting to speak. But he had all these audio.
We have 15 seconds. We have 15 seconds left.
Okay.
Would you want to come? Can we come back and then we can continue a little longer? Or okay. So I'm going to end it just so that we're not like that.
Okay.